There is Nothing But Beauty. An MDMA trip report by Holotropic Thinker. Uploaded to Erowid October 22nd, 2016. Other factors worth mentioning. I have borderline personality disorder. I'm 88 kilograms in terms of body weight. And I have trigeminal neuralgia. I'm a person who doesn't take mind-altering substances lightly or for fun on a night out. I use them responsibly in a safe setting to observe and examine the effects meticulously, with a goal of discovering what information I can extract from just about anything. The chemical itself, their effects on my mind and body, my emotions and sensory information during the altered states of consciousness, and everything else in between. However, I am most interested in their therapeutic value. I got a hold of crystallized MDMA a few weeks ago, when a friend of mine brought 500mg to split between us to 2 equal amounts. Having been self-educated about the dosage in relation to its effects, I decided to be cautious with the substance due to being a first timer, and ended up splitting my share down to 2 125mg doses. The aforementioned friend, experienced with the substance, took his entire dose of 250mg. The mindset was balanced throughout the day. The emotional realm had been undisturbed prior to the experience, and the setting was the relatively clean and cosy comfort of the home I have shared with my girlfriend for the past 5 years. It was 10 PM on a nice, quiet Saturday evening when we took our doses. The intake method was insufflation. The beige-brown, sugar-like sticky powder tasted uncomfortable as it started dripping down the back of my throat. The taste was a bit metallic, like a bitter and more synthetic version of brown sugar, with a pronounced dimension of a cough syrupy bite. After the insufflation process, the both of us went straight outside to the balcony for a cigarette. I've been a regular smoker since the age of 16, 10 to 15 cigarettes a day, strong blend, and during smoking, the effects started building up rapidly. Within 2 minutes of intake, the bodily effects had hit with full force. The mind was adapting to the alteration of consciousness in the way not unlike somatization, because the process was extremely fast. The bodily sensations of transcending were severe, causing great disturbance in tactile perception of your body weight, coordination, motor skills and eyesight. It was almost a bit too much to handle. Very little effects, however, were initially observed from the mind's point of view. 10:07 PM. We come out from the balcony and I was still somewhat in the process of transcending, because entering to the kitchen felt like going to a new house for the first time. This is when I first started observing the full extent of the effects, as I remember being extremely fascinated by the feel of the room, almost as if it was an entity of its own. My girlfriend was cooking food, smiling happily and asking about what's going on in my head. I answered that apart from physically feeling relatively nauseous, I'm feeling severely disoriented with all the sensations I was experiencing, much like going for an exploration process into uncharted territory with no map. Only that the uncharted territory was this new notion of how my consciousness handles the full range of my emotional realm. Very quickly, at around 10:15 PM, this friend of mine made a decision to leave the apartment to meet a friend of his, but wanted us to group hug before leaving. As soon as we touched each other's bodies in a purely platonic fashion, I felt I had been given the key to decipher what I was going through. At this point, all the bodily discomfort started to decrease as fast as it had built, so I felt inclined to report that it's okay for him to leave instead of having to be my trip advisor. All I needed was the comfort of my home and the presence of my girlfriend. Within 1 minute, all body load was completely gone and absolute cognitive clarity took its place. Me and my girlfriend have had a very rough, very long, and extremely consuming patch in the past with a variety of difficult and even unresolved issues, but love has always appeared to prevail and we've never been able to split up. There'd been times when I had contemplated and planned suicide, and had started even organising the future of my life towards that goal. I'd never been able to pinpoint the exact feeling I've had that has hindered this plan by pushing it perpetually further in the future. I of course have known what love is, and genuinely felt it a number of times with a number of people on various occasions, but as soon as I had reorganised the status of my consciousness to a self-referential coherence after the intake of MDMA, it was like an entire new level of feeling and sensing love in all its uncensored exuberance had taken a hold of me. This new form of feeling made me completely awestruck. Felt like I was a 5-year-old discovering a new, wonderful thing in nature, and having nothing but a sheer, uninhibited sense of wonder towards that phenomenon. The emotion was so powerful in depth and permeating all layers of what I had previously known that in contrast to this discovery, everything outside that feeling felt almost meaningless. Being bombarded with the all-encompassing nature of this discovery, all I could speak to my girlfriend was that there is nothing but beauty, and this is something else I've never experienced, for almost half an hour. I was completely blown away by the beauty that eluded all previously known sensory perceptions, and completely engaged in the experience with no ability whatsoever to escape the effects of the substance. During those 30 minutes, the sensation transformed into a whole new version of love and affection unlike I remember to have ever experienced. I became accustomed to this new discovery, but I noticed that this happened solely because my brain had to organise this new information in a way that it made sense to me. Something absolute had to be relative in order for me to make sense out of it. The way that my mind apparently chose as the optimal route to handle this new information was to create a new sense that is able to observe it. 10:45 PM. At this point, I had 6 senses all working in overdrive, but with absolutely no distortion whatsoever. The visual field was sharper with colours more pronounced than usual. All smells from the cooking were more distinctive than usual as well. The wine I was drinking at the table wasn't the best on the market, but still astoundingly pleasant in flavour. The music coming from the living room, Helios, Iniquia album, felt like it was a universe of its own, and all tactile information was felt directly in my veins. It's a bit more difficult to explain the sixth sense, but I would address it this way. I sense that my girlfriend has an aura, almost tangible in appearance, that draws me in its vicinity with almost maximum force. It was a bit like an electromagnetic force field that pulls objects to orbit around it. Because of the power I felt around that aura, I felt reluctant to even go to the bathroom for my business. I've experienced heightened sensory perception earlier with various strains of cannabis, and to some extent, with little amounts of psilocin, but this was something different. The massive sense of wonder with this new sense that I had acquired was so overwhelming and addictive that I felt much like a child in such mindset that I never want to leave from it. I was explaining this sensation to my girlfriend, and she started getting increasingly happier and was absolutely receptive of all my attempts to decipher this. This reception further fortified my confidence, and as soon as she was done with the cooking, we sat down at the table to drink wine and have an in-depth conversation in the light of flickering candlelight about the ailments we have had. The atmosphere that consisted of all the aforementioned sensory perceptions was so incredibly thick, and it had a huge impact on me. 11 PM to 1:30 AM. The conversation lasted for a bit over a couple of hours. We consumed 2 bottles of wine, and I had a couple of cigarettes during that time, but at any time I did not feel even slightly inebriated. Sometimes when I watched into my girlfriend's eyes during a reoccurring ephemeral silent moment, I could feel getting more sucked into the effects of the drug. Sensory information became increasingly vivid every time in each of the 6 senses. During this time, I became more tangibly aware of myself, who I truly am and what I truly feel, and that every layer I have constructed on top of another during my entire life is a filter placed to cope with all the cultural baggage that is imposed upon everybody. Upon realising this, I didn't feel particularly sad. I just hoped every single human being would be able to distinguish this and let anything like this impact their lives as little as possible. Everybody deserves to be loved the way they truly are, with no reference points from a cultural perspective. We are all pure from the heart, but cultural societies bury these qualities and pile too much rules and restrictions that directly manipulate individuals' perception of themselves. This became palpably evident to me, and ultimately I considered this piece of information as my profound lesson of this excursion. At 1:30 AM, me and my girlfriend started having sensual sex before she started sleeping. Sometime after this, I started shifting back to the normal state of experiencing my environment, and began to carefully analyse the experience, making formal notes for this report. I was enthused about the positive experience, and grateful about everything that I had felt during the experience. The enthusiasm was, of course, heightened by this comfortable feeling of having resolved some of the issues that have plagued the relationship I have with my girlfriend, plus me having a better understanding of myself as well. I still experienced great warmth due to the sensation of love, but the sensation started diminishing slowly, but relatively noticeably. I wasn't exactly bothered by that at the time, since I knew that the love itself is not going away. It's just getting more and more abstract, and I will still be able to summon this experience whenever I so desire, with a large array of methods that don't involve any aid from the substance itself. All in all, I felt grateful for the experience, and accepted fully that it is now coming to an end. I still felt unwilling to go to sleep though, so I rolled a small joint to calm me down. By 3 AM, I was sleeping. The following day, the serotonin levels had completely plummeted. I woke up at 9 AM to drink water, and I couldn't get a firm grip of my consciousness. Much like during hangover, but without the headache and tremors and with further cognitive impairment. Due to extreme fatigue, it felt extremely difficult to stay awake, and this might have contributed to the fact that I felt disorganised in my mind. I shrugged it off partly by contemplating that the subconscious has to move things around a bit after such transformative experiences, but also partly because I have previously felt that powerful synthetic drugs, most notably carbamazepine, produce massive drowsiness, at least for me. I was a bit more passive than normally throughout the entire day, avoiding deep and meaningful topics for some unbeknown reason, even though I wanted to share the experience with my closest friends. I gave the rest of my portion, the other 125mg dose, away. After 3 days of gradual recuperation in the aforementioned areas, I was fully back to my normal state in terms of vigour, awareness, cognitive skills, and consciousness. The afterglow started from this point on as well. Shulgin rating scale. T plus 2 minutes, plus T plus 15 minutes to T plus 60 minutes, a strong +++, T plus 60 minutes to T plus 210 minutes, a strong ++. Overall feeling, T plus 15 days, more conscientious, more engaged, less passive, more positive. Afterglow magnitude, 0 to 10, 5. Drug dependency, physiological, 0, psychological, 0. In summary, the information, based on the memories I have of this experience, has enhanced my consciousness moderately. Improvements in self-esteem are noticeable, feelings of frustration and irritability are mildly increased, but not so much that they manifest in behaviour. Behaviour is driven by compassion and acceptance a bit more than before. Propensity towards disappointment not increased, tolerance of boredom increasingly better. Frequency of mood swings and peak points somewhat dropped and their tolerance strongly improved. No noticeable effect to the frequency of trigeminal neuralgia paroxysms. 125mg insufflated is absolutely the largest dose I would try, even in a safe setting. I'd much rather take 100mg for this type of experience. It will most likely provide the same insight and experience without going overboard or unmanageable at any time. Therapeutic value comes from the permeating state of wonder and subsequent awe, which is unmistakably profound during the first time use, but will undoubtedly lose its potency and efficacy in short interval use. Showing me myself. A mescaline trip report, uploaded to Iroid October 12, 2004 by Pulsetsar. At 1:20 PM, I measured out 25 grams of dried Trichocereus peruvianus cactus and ground it in a coffee grinder. This got it into a nice fine powder, but there were still some chunks here and there, so then I dumped it in my mortar and pestle and finished it off. I then proceeded over the course of the next half hour to meticulously load 45 to 500mg gelatin capsules with the powder, stuffing more than 500mg into each one with some effort. From what I read, this might contain anywhere between 200 and 400mg of mescaline. It was an alkaloid profile similar to peyote, but with the advantage of being completely legal to grow and purchase. At around 1:55 PM, I began to swallow all 45 capsules, which took 10 minutes and 3 glasses of water. I hadn't eaten since the night before either. I then left to go to a festival to meet up with some friends. I got there and we made our way to the concert grounds. It was a beautiful day to be out in the sun on the huge open field of Grant Park, the Chicago skyline looking down over us. Kept checking my watch, and by 3 o'clock I concluded that my little experiment had failed. I was happy to note though, that there was absolutely no nausea at all, despite what many others had reported with this drug. I soon found out that I was much too hasty. Mescaline takes a long time to come on, but when it comes on strong. By 4 o'clock I was in the midst of the most amazing trip I have ever experienced. I had taken the big tryptamines before, LSD and psilocybin, But this was completely different. There were no plateaus and no going up and coming down with mescaline. It was more like a door was opened slowly, and then at the end of the trip slowly closed. But while it was open, nothing was held back and nothing fluctuated. This was a surprise to me, since I expected the usual scalloped pattern trip. With mescaline rather, I could take it as deep or superficial as I wanted. Every time I thought I was coming down, it was really me just shifting focus to a different aspect of the trip. I should note now that once open, the door to perception didn't close until 7 AM the next morning, almost 15 hours later. So much for the 10 to 12 hour estimate I had heard. None of the people I was with knew I was tripping, and nobody suspected a thing. In fact, the interactions I had with others that day were amazing. I felt a real connection with everyone that I talked to. My communication ability was not impaired at all, and I was able to focus so thoroughly on another human being and really connect with them. I noticed that most people when they talk to me don't look me directly in the eye. The intimacy and power that comes from looking into another person's eyes as you interact should never be underestimated, but also used with discretion since it can make many people uncomfortable. A sea, no, an ocean of people drift by as I walk around. I was exposed to so many faces and lives that day. A girl stands in the corner, and I notice how sad she is, and is amazed that nobody else sees it. I then look closer, and see that she is jealous of her friend playing kissy face with some guy. I wanted to go over and console her, but it is not my business, and not my place to interfere with the all-powerful lessons that could be learnt by both parties. I tell my friend T about it, and he agrees but is amazed that I was able to perceive that with so little effort. Looking at T, I almost get lost a little and give away my state. Every little stubble of hair on his face was a universe in and of itself. The detail of the external world on mescaline is unmatched. It doesn't create visual hallucinations the way that LSD does. It rather enhances one's ability to perceive the world visually. Every shadow, every crease, every reflection was available to me. It's amazing how much people move their facial muscles. During my trip it was impossible for people to lie or hide anything from me. Their faces were so transparent that I could see right into their souls and know what they were thinking and feeling. Perhaps this is why I was able to interact with them so well. And then I closed my eyes. What wondrous kaleidoscopic displays. There was no end to the patterns I saw. However, when I sat to meditate in the sun and concentrated on the third eye on my forehead, everything became still and the kaleidoscope disappeared. Never before was I capable of such concentration. My mind began to merge with the universe around me, and I experienced a joy unknown to most people in the world. As I opened my eyes and came back, I felt such compassion and sadness watching the people around me writhing in the delusion of their own isolated existence. If they could only see the world the way I do for a second, they would not live like they do. How could they not know how significant and insignificant they were? Alas, I am here in this world to better myself and do what I can to bring happiness to those around me. And I went about that task for the rest of the day. I saw myself as a nobody. Why should my feelings and desires matter more than anyone else's? I'm fully willing to let the world trample on me so long as something good comes out of it. It's amazing what ability I now have to make people happy. Something clicked that day and stuck with me. I called my mum the day afterwards and we had the best conversation we've had in years. I can't wait to be a physician. My love of people is increasing every day. During the trip, I was approached by 2 or 3 people preaching the love of Jesus, handing out flyers while saying, "Jesus loves you, man." Any other time, I would have refused the flyer and ignored them. But with the doors of my mind swung open though, I accepted their love and reflected it back 100-fold. I used to think of myself a Hindu, but that has no meaning now. I may as well be a Christian. What does it matter? The garment I wear and slogan I sling, when we all return in the end from whence we came. Gusta came on with music perfect for the day, followed by an amazing Pete Yorn performance and finally the Wallflowers. When I closed my eyes again, I tried another experiment, testing my memory. How vivid it was. I could remember so many experiences in my life that were previously inaccessible to me. What was amazing about mescaline is that it not only brings out detail in current experiences, but also past ones. I was remembering my friends' faces, and I could see them in as much detail as if they were in front of me. I remember all the little mannerisms and features on almost every single person in my life. What's amazing is that I was noticing, in retrospect, aspects of their behaviour and their looks that I didn't notice the first time around. It seems true that the mind records everything and leaves it ready for retrieval and analysis later. I've always known what an amazing memory I have, but I'm certain that anyone is capable of this. Darkness falls upon Chicago. I had my mind finger on the pulse of the city and felt it slow down. Fireworks are going off in Lincoln Park as we drive past it. I was practicing controlling the trip, increasing and then decreasing the intensity as much as I wanted. I literally felt like nothing was impossible for me to accomplish. It was all a matter of how much effort must be put forth. I vowed never to use the words "I can't" anymore, and decided to stop complaining about things. It was really hot that day, and there were a lot of attacks to my personal comfort, but I was able to bear them all simply by detaching my attention from them. It was a Friday, and I was observing my weekly fast, which would not normally be easy to do at the Taste of Chicago, but that day I wasn't fazed at all. My companions were impressed, and I hope the example of conviction that I set for them rubs off and allows them to pursue their goals in life. It's amazing to me how many things that we personally are responsible for, and yet we always find a way to place the blame elsewhere. My knee hurts, so I can't play as well today. It's too hot for me to walk outside. I can't eat tomatoes because they make me sick. I could never fast for a day, blah blah blah. People need to take control of their lives. The locus of control for 99% of life is within the individual and not elsewhere. This flies in the face of contemporary psychological thought, but it really is a truth, even if it is buried deep within us. I end up in Evanston, watching the stars. My friends ask me how to find the North Star, and I tell them about lining up the two stars in the Big Dipper and how they form a line pointing to it. This simple fact never seemed so beautiful before, but I resisted launching into another session of wonder at the clockwork order inherent in the universe. We walked all around the Lakeville in the Northwestern University campus, which is beautiful in summer and even more beautiful when perceived through mescaline eyes. We walked a lot that day. I was impressed by the amount of energy at my disposal given the lack of food. I could summon it seemingly out of nowhere and channel it wherever I wanted. At 2 AM in the morning, my friends suggest that I eat. I found their concern funny, but thought that since it was the next day, I may as well break my fast. The sensory experience of eating was remarkable. Flavours have so much depth and detail to them and are packed with potent association with memories. The sense of touch was enhanced along with all others. I could even feel mosquitoes landing on my skin, and I don't know how this was possible. Although I didn't have any, I bet that sex on mescaline would have been an amazing and extremely rewarding and powerful experience if with the right person. Although the sensations and act of sex would have been extremely pleasurable, the desire for sex was not enhanced in the slightest. How could it have been? My mind was pure and free from such desires. There was so much more to the world than a passing sexual encounter at this point. As I wind up at my friend's apartment to fall asleep, I sit in bed for a couple of hours after my nightly meditation, waiting for the trip to wind down. I begin yet another memory experiment, and begin to recall some of the earliest events in my life, tracing it all the way up to the present. The memories were vivid and detailed as expected. The trip ends, but the effect will be with me forever. I'm amazed at how a plant is capable of generating a full-blown, legitimate mystical experience. I know now how imperfect I really am, and must work towards making all of the realizations of that wonderful day a reality. One has to live his message for the world, not preach it. All it takes is a little practice. The best day of my life. A 5.5 gram mushroom trip report from Shroomery. Terrifying, horrifying, yet amazing. So far, I have tripped 3 times on shrooms. The only other recreational drug I have used is marijuana. For me, tripping on shrooms is an extremely spiritual experience. Hundreds of the most amazing thoughts that I've ever had came to mind with such ease. Shrooms have changed the way that I perceive life, the universe, and everything. Shrooms can't magically change your life. They can only speed up your deeper, more life-changing thought processes. The change isn't even much of a change. It just gives you a whole new perspective. Every time I trip, I feel older and wiser. I think that everyone should try a good shroom trip at least once in their life. It's amazing in every way. This is the story of my most amazing trip so far. 2 years after my first trip, my close friends, Z, DC, Do and me, decided to go up into the mountains and trip at Zed's cabin during the daytime in nature. Very cool and fun idea. I didn't get many visuals during my first trip, so I decided to more than double the dose. Very stupid idea for a second trip. I took 5.5 grams, a huge amount, because I wanted to see what shrooms could really do. Needless to say, I got what I wanted. We stayed at Zed's cabin for 3 days. Day 1 and 2 we smoked marijuana. Day 3 we ate our mushrooms at 11 AM. This was Zed and DC's first trip. Zed, DC and Do each had 3.5 grams and smoked marijuana while they waited for them to kick in. I ate 5.5 grams on an empty stomach and washed the taste away with some orange juice. I did not smoke because I wanted to see what pure shrooms would be like. When I smoke marijuana, I feel nothing for a few minutes. Then I get a gut feeling and it hits me. Well, 15 minutes after we ate them, I got a huge gut feeling. I decided that it would be best to separate myself from my friends because I knew something big was coming. I sat down on a bed in the back room where they could not see me and I put on my sunglasses. Good idea for day tripping, prevents damage to your eyes. But there was no door between us. Zed came with me and set up some music for me to listen to while I waited. He asked me if I was okay and I said yes. 15 minutes later, 30 minutes after we ate, Zed came to check on me again and said, "Are you crying?" I said, "Yeah, but I'm okay. Just leave me, I'll be fine." I looked into the mirror beside me and my face was red, and I was crying my eyes out because my body high was really intense, and it hit me so fast. Tons of marijuana hits me like a brick. My first shroom trip hit me like a piano. This shroom trip in particular hit me like a planet, and I am not exaggerating. Coming up on 5.5 grams is one hell of an experience. 45 minutes after we'd eaten our shrooms, Zed came to check on me and told me that everyone was tripping. I got up and started to walk around. I did not notice any visuals yet, but I wasn't looking at anything. For the next hour or so I would be crying my eyes out and grunting loudly. I couldn't help it, because it was so intense. My friends thought I was possessed. My face was red and they said that my voice was deeper. DC said that if my mum had seen me, she would have fainted on the spot. I probably would have too if I'd seen myself. I was wearing a hoodie and my sunglasses, and for some reason I decided to go outside. Zed, DC and I walked outside into nature, and Do stayed behind. He likes to be alone. I did not see much of Do after this. I walked off of the porch and wandered 10 feet into the woods. It felt more like 50 feet at the time though. Zed and DC said I was holding tree branches and staring at the ground. I do remember this. I remember everything. Reality just didn't seem anything like what I was experiencing. The scary thing is that it all seemed so real. I did not think for 1 second that I was tripping and that everything I saw wasn't real. I was only thinking, wow, this is really happening. What is happening to me? Everything had the wrong textures. One log that I saw looked like it had actual leopard fur. I could see the hair and the pattern and everything, and it was so real. I looked over at Zed and DC, and to my horror, Their skin was made of wood, and what I was seeing was so real. I could not bear to look at them. We walked for 2 minutes. It felt much longer though, down to a lake, but there were people in the distance, so we stopped. Zed looked at me and said to DC, "Okay, we have to go back now. Look at A, me." I was grunting loudly like an insane person. My face was red and I was still crying my eyes out. I could not control the strange noises that I was making. They said it looked like I was trying to control myself but failing miserably because I was having a total brain overload. I felt fine, but we went back anyway. I don't know if Zed and DC were actually mad at me, but I thought they were really mad. Zed came up to me and in a lecturing tone of voice said something like, "You're acting crazy. DC and I are thinking of never tripping with you again." Very bad idea. If someone is tripping, never tell them anything that could upset them because it will upset them 1,000 times worse than sober. I felt terrible. I thought they would never forgive me and that they hated me. However, I do thank Zed for saying that to me because I think that I triggered the most amazing, terrifying, horrifying and unimaginable experience anyone could ever possibly hope to have. Nothing on this earth could have ever prepared me for this. Zed escorted me to the attic of his cabin, which overlooks the main living room, so that he could keep an eye on me while I went crazy. The attic had a window, a bed, and 2 walls which met above me like this, and a yellowish carpet with reddish splotches all over. This was the place where I would go completely insane. Zed brought me some orange juice and I tried to drink it, but most of it just spilled all over my shirt. He told me to lay on the bed, so I took off my sunglasses and Zed took the hoodie. I was on the bed, but I was too afraid to close my eyes. I could pretty much see the universe melting away, and it was the most terrifying experience of my life. The nails on the wall were flowing down the walls like sticks in river. The crease in the wall was getting larger and smaller, breathing. I looked at where the 2 walls met above me, and that crease opened up so wide that it looked like the cabin was swallowing me. I was too afraid to close my eyes, so I looked away from the crease and then everything was gone. The universe had melted away, including my body. All I saw was random textures: wall, carpet, bedsheet, grass, my skin, everything, all melting together and rapidly flowing around me. There is absolutely no way that I could possibly describe what I was seeing to you. I guess this is what they call an out-of-body experience, because I saw my skin melting and flowing away with everything else. I was more terrified and horrified than I had ever been in my entire life. I will never feel a more horrible feeling, ever. It was all so real. I saw the universe melt away with my very eyes. It was like I was in another dimension. I was grunting loudly like a padded room and straitjacket insane person, and still crying my eyes out. I was calling out to my friends. "Where am I?" I heard no responses. It felt like I would be stuck there for eternity and that I would be terrified the entire time. I have no idea if my eyes were closed or open, but I have a feeling they were closed because I don't think my vision could be that warped. No way. It was all in my head and I had no idea. To me it was all real. I was going crazy in this manner for about 30 minutes, but it felt more like years. I don't know why, but for some reason I calmed down. I think I was just finished coming up. Yes, coming up on 5.5 grams was that intense for me. Maybe I ate really potent shrooms, or maybe I had the perfect conditions. Empty stomach, vitamin C. Some say that's a myth though, etc. But I thought I'd have to eat at least 7 grams to experience what I experienced on only 5.5 grams. It was the most terrifying, horrifying experience of my life, and it felt like it took literal years. But it was worth it. The next hour would be the most amazing hour of my life. I literally saw the whole universe slowly come back together, and it was the best feeling in the world. You would think that the universe would melt back together in the same way that it melted away, but I would describe it as folding back together. It was kind of like a pop-up book, and the pages were turning as I moved around. Very cool. There is absolutely no way that I could truly describe this hour to you. I was back in my body, but my body was fused to whatever it was that I was touching, like a bedsheet. I tried to move, but it was like I had melted into the bed. I guess I somehow turned a page of the pop-up book, because the bedsheet went away and now I was fused to the carpet instead. I bet in reality I was just rolling around the room. During this folding phase, I had the most absolutely unbelievably amazing thoughts about God and the universe. To this day, it feels like I know how the universe operates and the true nature of God. I don't think it is even possible to put my thoughts into words. I would not trade this pop-up book hour for anything on this earth. I feel like it gave me such profound perspective. I feel like it has given me knowledge about this dimension that we live in that I never would have fathomed in my life if I had never experienced 5.5 grams of insanity. I felt like as I watched the universe come back together with my own eyes, I gained knowledge of how the universe is structured and the true nature of God. I wouldn't trade this knowledge for all the money in the world. In fact, since that experience I have not desired any material objects. I used to want electronic gadgets and fast cars, but now I do not care at all for these things. I feel like I can see how worthless it all really is. This world is so fake. There is something so much deeper that we could never comprehend. The thoughts that I used to value the most, math and science, now feel empty in comparison. I'm still interested in science, but it doesn't hold any water for me. It's all an illusion. I feel like I now only value that which is real. This is incredibly difficult to explain, so I'll just continue on before you all think that I'm just insane. I would describe what I was seeing as everything folding together, everything being the pages of a pop-up book or having kaleidoscope vision. It felt like I had woken up from the worst dream anyone could ever possibly have. I would not wish my previous seemingly infinite terror on anyone. It was all okay now though. The world was coming back together and I have never been so happy to see it. It felt like I could fold my way to Mars if I wanted to. I decided not to though, because for the first time I realised that I was on a shroom trip and that everything was going to be okay, and what I was seeing wasn't real. I did not want to fold to any place that was not right next to me, because I bet I just would have hurt myself. I wasn't crying my eyes out anymore and I wasn't grunting uncontrollably. All was well. I was lying face down on this really strange carpet. It seemed like I was laying in a canyon with mountains for some reason. All the straight lines that I saw were curved. Everything that I saw was warped. The world had finally come together and now it all looked like an amazing dream. I was sane again and I had to pee like you wouldn't believe. I asked Zed if I could use the bathroom. He said it was okay, but I could tell that he did not trust me entirely. He just thought that I was still insane, but I was quite sane and unbelievably happy to be alive. When I looked at myself in the mirror, my face was all warped and melty, but it didn't freak me out. For some reason, it was cool. My hands were sweaty and covered in whatever was on that unvacuumed carpet. Normally, I'd freak out and wash my hands ASAP, but I didn't care. It didn't bother me at all. I was just happy to be alive. All of Zed's family pictures were amazing. It looked like I could reach in and shake their hands. It felt like I could tell exactly what the people in the pictures were thinking. I came out the bathroom and told Zed that his family pictures were amazing. He just thought I was still insane, so he sent me back up to the attic. Sometimes the room felt tiny, like I could take one step and be on the other side. And sometimes the room felt huge, like I was a miniature version of myself. It's exactly like being in a cartoon. Wow, what a perfect way to describe it. Luckily, this lasted for 5 hours. I spent 2 of those hours in the attic because Zed didn't trust me to be in the family room with everyone else. While I was up there, it felt like I could melt into objects just by willing it. Like if I wanted to replace the leather on the couch with my skin, I could just melt on over to the couch and envelop it. At one point it felt like I was the cabin. Like I contained everything that was inside it. It was kind of weird though because D.O. said, and I quote, "It feels like me, is the cabin." I have often heard that people who trip together read each other's minds in a way, and I think that's exactly what D.O. and I experienced just then. After 2 hours of being sane, I convinced Zed to let me come down to the family room and chill with everyone. They told me that I smelled horrible, and it was true. I smelled like a wild animal, and I looked like I'd gone through hell. I don't think that my trip ended until just before I went to bed that night at around midnight. In the morning I had a huge headache, but I wonder if that's just from my horrible sleeping position. I wouldn't doubt it. All in all though, I will never forget this trip. It was easily the most amazing experience of my entire life. The Great Architect of Life, a 5,600 microgram LSD experience, posted to shroomery.org. There's no way to tell my story without coming off utterly insane. However, I truly believe this experience was not only life-changing, that it has been a major awakening and change in my life and soul. I consider myself a shaman, an explorer of spiritual and physical realms. I've seen many things, however nothing will ever compare to this truly humbling and enlightening experience. It all started with LSD. Me and 2 friends had decided we would not only push ourselves to a higher consciousness, but test our mental and spiritual limits. One friend had similar goals in mind, as we were both very spiritual, and experiment with LSD for spiritual purposes only. However, my other friend uses it strictly for recreational uses. Anyway, I planned to take 2 tabs of LSD every 20 minutes, which eventually culminated in 14 hits of LSD. This was for me, the others took 7, as I am much more experienced. Each dose had approximately 400 micrograms, which equals to about 4 hits per 1 tab. Overall, I consumed 5,600 micrograms of LSD. Everything was going smoothly at first. We simply enjoyed ourselves and just laughed and had a great time until the time that I planned to meditate, after making sure the others were safe. However, it all hit me unexpectedly. I was staring at my friend, which at this point, he turned into a midget and ran off. I was far gone, but doing well. When this happened, I burst out into laughter. I felt nothing but complete joy. After a good 2 minutes of laughing though, my laugh fell to tears. This point in time, I felt many things as I was curled up into a ball on the couch. In a matter of 1 second on Earth, and what would feel like hours in this realm, I assumed I belonged to this being I believed to be God. I was face to face with him. though he was a blinding, humbling light, weakening and bringing me feelings of utter joy, sadness, fear, and even a humbling bliss. I can hardly explain this feeling, other than that it was divine. I felt that I was in two places at once, in the presence of this God, and on earth completely conscious of both of these worlds. In this, I was scolded by this being, for being so misled and blind. I remember the conversation I had with this being, and feeling that I was with him for hours, even though on earth it happened in a split second. After being scolded, he revealed to me many truths and falsehoods that haunted me. I can never fully describe what I went through, other than that it was the most humbling experience I'd ever had. When this being explained everything, I began to see the architect of the spiritual and physical plane, and how this being had created everything. I remember walking through this spiritual grid with lines everywhere. It looked very similar to this. There were numbers and mathematics everywhere. It blew my mind. Everything just made so much sense. This is what I believed to be God's architect. It was all too organised and structured too perfectly to be fake. This was not in my head, it was real. In this moment, my friends were observing me, seeming very interested in everything. I tried so hard to describe everything to them, all while walking physically in this grid-like world. Suddenly, a being came into my presence. He was formed like a grid, similar to a 3D model in a video game before they placed the skin on the character. This man guided me using a conscious voice as we began to walk, and a world around me began to form around. What appeared to me was similar to a library, similar to this picture. Unfortunately, I can't actually get the picture, the link in the trip report doesn't work, so I'm just going to feature some images of the Akashic Records, which is what he's actually referring to. Basically, for those of you who aren't in the know, I'll just read the Wikipedia article. In the religion of Theosophy and the philosophical school called Anthroposophy, the Akashic Records are a compendium of all universal events, thoughts, words, emotions, and intent ever to have occurred in the past, present, or future, in terms of all entities and life forms, not just human. They are believed by Theosophists to be encoded in a non-physical plane of existence known as the mental plane. There are anecdotal accounts, but no scientific evidence for the existence of the Akashic Records. They've actually come up in a lot of trip reports that I've put in the past. I think there was one about Datura I did, where they actually encountered the Akashic Records, so go check that one out. It's actually really fascinating whether you believe in it or not. I just think it's really interesting. Upon seeing this, I knew exactly where I was. The Akashic Records. In this moment, an unlimited and overwhelming source of knowledge poured through my mind at such an unbearable rate. Suddenly, spiritual truths and earthly visions would run through my head at the speed of light. At this point I knew I was connected to an unlimited source of knowledge. On Earth, my friends were surrounded around me as I kept spinning in a circle as I'm walking through this library. I'd spit out countless amount of information that for some reason only made sense to my spiritual friend who had experienced this himself. At this point, I felt like I knew everything. Any question asked was answered, no matter how difficult. Even now, I can recall this knowledge very easily, as I feel I am now connected to this place by soul. I remember feeling countless emotions, as I would see the most horrifying visions of pain and suffering, as well as beauty. I saw all aspects of the earth, and grew spiritually more aware the longer I dwelled in this library. After a few minutes, everything grew more rapid and more intense. Everything was infinite and way too much for my human mind to handle. It began to hurt, and it became so overwhelming. I forced myself out as my tears and the feeling of so many emotions within a second. Again, 1 second on Earth was like hours there. I just cannot explain it. I remember trying to describe so much, but there are no words to describe such divine knowledge. I remember seeing this vast knowledge and only being revealed such a small percentage that it blew me through many different dimensions simultaneously, witnessing countless beings and worlds, all who were as conscious of me as I was of them. In this moment, I felt this feeling of becoming one with everything, and realised that everything is one. All lives, beings, even a simple little rock. We are one. I cannot describe this. At this point, my mind was worn and blown away. I needed a break. I needed to fathom everything because it was all too much to handle. I know some people who have experienced a very similar thing to what I have, which ensures my faith that this was all 100% real and divine. Now, weeks later, I am a changed man. I see the world with more sympathetic eyes, with a much deeper connection to everything. I now hold a connection with this being, and he guides me. I do not share all this for bragging rights, that is not my reason. I share this because I feel that I've been given a privilege of viewing this amazing experience, and I want the world to know that your spirit is more real than you can ever imagine, that there is many gods, but there is one above all. I'm also hoping that I just might find someone who can relate to all this. I'm sorry that I cannot be more vivid, but remember, I have only shared with you a small portion and described everything the best I possibly can. Please, if anyone else can relate, please share. A journey inside my own subconscious. A 500mg ketamine experience by EMC, uploaded to earwid.org on November 27, 2011. I'd been experimenting with ketamine at a recreational level for the last 6 months or so, mostly at parties and in nightclubs, enjoying the unpredictable bouncy effects. There was roughly 500mg left from the previous night out, and I was feeling slightly anxious and paranoid about keeping drugs in my parents' house. I was very relaxed, but slightly bored in my room at around midnight, so I thought it would be a good idea to get rid of any incriminating evidence and cure my boredom both at the same time. Got into bed, turned off the lights, put my headphones on and started listening to music. I then insufflated the entire 500mg plus dose at once. Earwid note: the dose described in this report is very high, potentially beyond Earwid's heavy range, and could pose serious health risks or result in unwanted extreme effects. Sometimes extremely high doses reported at errors rather than actual doses used. I had taken doses as high as this before, but it just resulted in a sort of blacked out sleep state. I sat up in bed on my laptop, going through the familiar and enjoyable rolling symptoms: numb lips, blurred vision, heavy head, fidgety hands, etc. I began to hear a steadily rising roaring noise, like the sound of a jet plane taking off right outside my window. Turned behind me to look what the cause of the noise was, and to my surprise there was a golden light streaming through my blinds. This was the first time I'd had a completely convincing hallucination on any sort of drug, and was impressed with the level of detail my mind had conjured up. I could even see tiny particles of dust floating in the sunlight that was shining into my bedroom, even though it was midnight and pitch black outside. I was aware of this fact, and was still very aware of my surroundings too. I was being my usual cynical self about the whole situation, trying to enjoy myself, but stay in control at the same time. I readjusted myself in bed, and suddenly felt that jolt of fear that I can only associate with tipping too far back on a chair. I felt as if I was perched on an imaginary cliff edge, and by leaning to my left side I could tip, quite nervously, over this edge and really feel a true sense of gravity that was pulling me down. I giggled to myself as I tipped backwards and forwards. My head was very, very heavy now. Things were starting to get more and more hazy. Once I understood I was in control of this tipping motion, I remember having the rational thought of where this was going to lead, but the voice in the back of my head was fading, and at that moment, I honestly didn't care. I flung myself off the cliff, not physically, but in my mind, and plunged into a bottomless pit of darkness in total freefall. I fell for what seemed like forever, until I began to orientate myself, working out which way was up and which was down in this apparent infinity, and again understanding that I was in control of this trip, and I could fly around in this darkness, enjoying the thrill of weightlessness and eventually flying all the way up to the stars looking down on Earth. The series of events is a little jumbled in my head, but at this point the vision inside my head and my actual sight began to meld together, as my laptop that was sitting on my lap began to float down through the darkness until it was focused and in view. I heard snatchings of the music that was playing in my headphones that had been all but silent until now, echoing into the distance, with Pariah Orpheus in particular ringing very true. I was regaining my sense of coordination, as if the effects were wearing off, which disappointed me slightly as I wanted more, but I carried on nevertheless. And once I realised I actually possessed a pair of hands again, I instinctively reached for the trackpad of my laptop and navigated the mouse to the top right hand corner where I clicked the red X to close the window and turn the screen black. Somehow I knew by doing this I accepted that I was moving on to the next layer of the trip. I then felt as if I was lifted off my bed. Not by my own control this time, and suddenly I was projected straight through my laptop screen at tremendous speed. Back into the dark space again. I was now joined by 3 girls. 2 to my left and 1 to my right, in white dresses with dark hair, all on horseback, for some unknown reason. I remember that the girl immediately to my left was the most beautiful girl I had ever seen. She was so perfect, I can't even describe her. She looked like an angel or something. Her dark brown eyes stared deep into me, almost lovingly, but somehow I knew she didn't love me back. But it didn't matter because I knew what we needed to do. We were all riding together, but again I wasn't in control. It felt like we were strapped onto roller coaster tracks, chugging along in slow motion to some sort of destination with incredible colourful visuals shooting past at high speed. And with movement, sound and light, all fusing together as one, my mind was unable to separate the energy that was steadily building up. It started to become more clear. We were on a mission to prevent the end of the world before time ran out. I say time in inverted commas because I had no concept of it even existing. I was just there in the moment, but I had some type of countdown, like a bomb timer. And then I saw it. The sun, right in front of me. So beautiful. It's perfectly crisp and clear like high definition TV. I've never seen anything so clear in my life. It was so real, even more real than anything I'd seen before with my own 2 eyes. And I could feel heat radiating off it as well, comforting me. We galloped towards it on these horses that gave off a trail of gold light exactly the same that originally came through my blinds, until eventually we were within reaching distance. So I extended my hand out and pierced the surface, and at that same time the countdown timer hit 0, and every other bit of sound, light and feeling all reached this exact moment of a singularity, an absolute peak of nothingness. That was the turning point. It was like an atomic bomb going off inside my head. Everything was obliterated outwards in a huge explosion of white light. Sight, sound, movement, everything. Was this death? I wasn't sure. I felt like I'd just smashed through a giant invisible pane of glass and I could feel the intense force of my consciousness shattering. It stripped me of every emotion I've ever felt in my life, especially guilt. I felt completely free, and not even human. I was just a single object blissfully floating through space, all the time believing that this was truly real. There was no more rational thought anymore, no more perspective or objective view on anything. I felt as if all these barriers had been broken down, and for the first time I could see in the truest sense of the word. Looking back now, if the explosive moment before it had been death, then now I was passing over to the other side. I could hear 1,000 voices talking to me at the same time, creating an intense yet soothing buzz, almost like a meditating hum. And at the same time, seeing millions of complicated equations whizzing around me. My brain easily separating and processing this huge stream of information for what felt like years. Although I couldn't decipher any of it to actually read or hear it, I completely understood and agreed with it. However, I couldn't recall any of it to you now. I'm not quite sure how I know this, but I am certain that this was a totally inward experience inside my own subconscious. I was exploring myself as a person, and the drug was the key to my mind that unlocked this whole other level of communication. I wish I could tell you now all the amazing things I heard, but there are no words to translate it to you at all. Sometime after that, the 3 girls from the previous layer of the trip pulled me down gently from this outer stratosphere, and I floated down like a feather, slowly into their comforting arms, where I was now flat on my back looking up at the stars, and we began to fly again. I was being carried by them. We were getting faster and faster, faster than I've ever travelled before, but I felt totally safe. I knew I was going home. I didn't want it to end at all, but at the same time I felt ready and enlightened. I saw Earth and we flew down towards it, getting closer, flying over hundreds of rooftops until they delivered me, back through my bedroom window where I snapped back very suddenly into my body, regaining full consciousness and senses within a split second. I was totally back to normal. I stayed still for a moment, contemplating my profound experience in sheer awe, and had to touch my hands and face to check this was reality. I'd not moved a single muscle from the seated position I'd started in, and to my surprise only 40 minutes had passed. It had honestly felt like a lifetime. I had a small drink of orange juice to wash away the unpleasant yet familiar taste in my mouth, and felt a lovely warm afterglow from my experience. I remember sitting in bed, beaming from ear to ear that I had the opportunity of experiencing something so special, before drifting off nicely to sleep, feeling very happy and fulfilled. For weeks and months afterwards, with an experience such as this, I felt the need to share it with people, but nobody really understood. Even my drug friends were sceptical of my sudden spiritual ramblings. People were trying to laugh this off and tell me that it was just a funny little trip where I danced about in rainbows of unicorns in that sort of stereotypical acid image. But I feel like this was much, much more than that. It's given me a different outlook on life, as if all my thoughts had been collected and neatly organised. There were less niggling questions in the back of my mind, less worries. I was now feeling like I had a much clearer path in life. I soon began to read up on similar sort of experiences with ketamine and other substances such as DMT, and was shocked to find that nearly every description was the same. Flying through space, meeting spiritual, otherworldly beings, ego death, moments of singularity. How could it be possible that the human brain, being as complex and unique in itself, produced such similar experiences in individual people when administered with a drug? Such small details reappearing throughout these accounts makes me sometimes believe that this is more than just a coincidence, and that actually, we are unlocking some deep hidden part of our subconscious that isn't accessible to the sober mind. And all this time, it genuinely astounds me that the brain has the power to do all this, to make us see, hear, feel such wonderful things, and yet for 99% of the time we cannot access it. We need these so-called illegal substances to reach the full potentials of our minds. Infinite Insanity and Existence. A 16-gram truffle trip report by Loving Radiance, uploaded to actualize.org July 14th, 2021. Set. Relaxed self-compassion and self-love since the 1 week or so. Setting. With my trip partner in nature on a lake. Preparation. I mixed the dried truffle powder equaling 16 grams of fresh Fantasia truffles in orange juice and let it sit for 25 minutes. I met with my trip partner in the courtyard at 9 AM. He got another mix of the same dose. We drank the mix. I felt a bit sick already. I ditched the last few crumbles from the powder, expecting to go insane if the last few ones were also ingested. The report. Come up. On the last few hundred metres to the lake, my friend recognises that the buildings and surfaces feel skewed when we entered a small new area. I say that I feel like laying down the instant we are done preparing the blankets and snacks. When we arrive at the lake, I already feel loosening of boundaries and an onset of slight general confusion. I feel myself losing grip on reality, and I resist the experience. I get into a mindset of waiting it out, and this is already in the beginning. Wanting to drift away from this experience, I plug my headphones in and listen to my music. It has a bit of an ambient and flowing feeling. We start to chat a bit. After some time, my body begins to shiver while I am letting go of the body and imagining to flow into the ground. I proclaim that I feel cold and put on the warm clothes I brought with me. The shivers continue, so I move to the beach into the sun. It's finally warm. No more shivers. I move to sit a bit on a patch of grass. Being warm again, I go back to the blankets and kneel on them. I feel as if I'm losing myself. I throw myself on the blanket, laying there without orientation, just waiting and waiting. I want to refocus on love, but love is intangible, nowhere to be found, although it's known that there is something called love. After some time of just laying around, I ask my friend if he likes to hear music. He says yes, and I turn on Sleep, which I listened to earlier. Still laying there wanting to fade away and wanting to have this experience passing in an instant, my trip partner offers to draw tarot cards for me. I decline, because I fear a misdirection of the trip. I want to leave this setting with his presence. Being back at the sunny beach, I lay myself on the grass and feel myself being close to identity with death. I hold on to me. I witness that I hold on to the grass, not wanting to lose myself. Random words appear in my mind, like waves washing ashore. They feed and flow into each other through rhymes in a strange loopy way, because they don't rhyme at all when seen from an ordinary state of consciousness, with no beginning or end. Kind of like the alien language of Arrival 2016. I lose more grip on reality. I'm almost not there anymore. Losing grip feels strange. Imagine reaching out for a rock. You take the rock in your hand. By taking it, you grasp it because it has grip. Imagine mentally reaching out for an image or concept of any kind, like for example a rock. You hold it in your mind and grasp it. Imagine reaching out for a rock with your hand. You cannot get hold of it. It slips through the hand, or it has an aura that makes it untouchable. Imagine mentally reaching out for any concept like a rock. It is just as untouchable as a slippery rock you want to pick up. My tripmate comes to check on me laying on the grass. He tells me that he had a crush on a good friend of mine a few months back. He was reminded of that because he drew the Lover's Tarot card. There is a recognition that I cannot really grasp the story he's sharing, and I say that we can talk about it after the trip. Again, I feel wanting to not be in his presence anymore and go back. I let myself fall on the blankets and lay myself down without taking off my shoes. My partner comes back and asks me about the shoes. I am non-responsive now, losing myself with more intensity by the second. I still resist the fading of the identity. However, there is no suffering in resisting it. It's just an automatic response of the ego saying I don't like that. It's still ongoing with or without me holding on. Again, I try to relax into the moment and wait for the experience to end. I'm disoriented. The clothes on me are messed up and there is no mental capacity to make my clothes straight or to eat any of the snacks. My friend asks about kissing bruises on my neck, if they are done by a friend I slept with. He says, I'm glad it worked out with you two. I don't understand that. There is the interpretation that he talks about love between me and other, but love from others doesn't register. All I love is myself. There is no love coming from others, all projection is mine. There is a recognition of this ape body and bodily desires. Beginning to peak. The entire setting reveals itself to feel like a stage in a theatre. There's a knowing that illusion cannot harm anything. The realization is expressed through words that I can easily kill myself in that state. My friend reacts confused to that coming out of LR's mouth. There's no difference. It's an illusion. It's the playing ground. Speaking in the direction of the partner, he's now casually reading, that I'm insane and dead. No one was saying that. And that existence makes no sense. It's felt that the illusory brain is broken. Speaking out that spirituality and more things are bullshit. Meaning nothing and being nothing because they are created. Words come out. Spoken towards the friend, but actually being directed to myself, which is nobody in that case. Just let go. It doesn't make sense. Let go. Let go. Let go. Being in existence. Existence, existence, existence. Seeing the world now without interpretation. Feeling existence itself. Nothing but existence is. Direct, radical, total, and seen as naked. My partner picks up on that confusion. He seems to have a breakdown or an early midlife crisis. In that moment, I am not there for him. It is felt that he is an illusion being projected by me. The rhyming words which don't actually rhyme in ordinary state of consciousness are coming to the foreground again. The visuals are faint rainbow-coloured random Latin letters flowing like blood in blood vessels across the trees and air. It's just a huge screen. My partner asks repeatedly if I'm okay because of the disoriented state I seem to be in. I seem to not respond. There's a knowing that there are question marks in sentences which feels like a child discovering what language is, and there's no making sense of it at all. There's knowledge without understanding, like having an encrypted data file. Language is known, and there is something called England and Germany which have different modes of speaking. There's a knowing that the body automatically speaks those languages and that the partner understands. Other people begin to come. Children with a dad. I project the illusion of them. They are not real. They are part of the play. Sentences are clearly heard, but make no sense. There is a feeling that it could make sense, but it doesn't. Like hearing a foreign language but not understanding it. Like hearing sounds and not knowing what it is. Family constellations make no sense. Intangible. Remembering the family which this body is a part of, that this body is now insane and will be looked upon like a failed child that is now living in a mental institution. Looking from awareness, it feels like consoling a child that broke a stick. There is no fear or disappointment, there is just compassionate presence. There is a recognition that the projection of family and others in general is insane, even though I am insane. Timeless confusion. The meaning-making structure malfunctions. It feels like trying to climb up a smooth metal wall, slipping down every time when trying. A completely fried brain. Knowing of a body with skeleton and organs. Looking up, the tree branches and leaves seem to form an interconnected web. By looking to the headphones, they are recognised to be an infinite loop. Infinity is just casually being here. No memories. Total confusion. Looking at wobbly hands. What is that? Wiped hard drive. Like an infant. What is that? An energetic field around skin is felt to extend 10 to 20 centimeters from it, like an aura surrounding the body. The energy on the skin is connected to the mental state. It's flowing. The mental state could not be there without the energetic sensation. Come down. I am being asked to go home because my partner wants to learn for a class. I repeatedly say no. There's an arising sense of alien students having a university life. Feels like being in a theatre play, and that the consciousness in the student body plays along. More children come by. I am being told to act normal. It feels like being an alien consciousness imposter in a human character who is involved in alien society and acts as if he knows what is going on. There is character play of acting, like things are normal, like brushing off dirt from the pants when in fact the world feels upside down. It's acting like being the character. It is told to my partner that I still don't compute. What is going on? Finally, my partner urges me to move as he felt disturbed by the newly arriving children. Packing all things together feels like an instant. Being told to tie my shoes. Looking back to the place we were at. It feels clean, like there haven't been blankets, snacks, etc. We were never there. Looking at his watch, he says it is 1:30 PM. Time doesn't make sense at all. It feels like reliving the same day again and again, and time is just a creation to give the sense of many days being lived one after another. The whole trip back home feels like lasting just a second, even though it is not known where we go and why. It just flows. The euphoric mood is registered. The world is recognised as heaven. The body functions on its own. Words flow out. Their meaning isn't known, but they could make sense. Nothing makes sense, and that's okay. Even that makes no sense. Taking the correct way back just happens on its own. There's no clue what and where the places we are heading towards at all. To be nobody is true confidence. Coming back home, I lay on the couch and watch parts of the writing on my dream board which interestingly bounce floatingly together and apart like being held in place. It's like leaves on a tree with certain parts of leaves moving together because they are on the same branches and at the same time moving independently to the leaves of other branches. There's no knowledge where the phone thing is. It can be that it is still on the beach. The possibility of it being lost forever feels okay. At the same time, the survival aspect feels inconvenient. Still laying on the couch, I am registering emptiness inside, and wait for it to be over. I find the phone, and then take a semi-awake nap. Still half tripping, I write to my partner if we could meet up in the courtyard to integrate the experience. I feel that grounding myself is just what's needed. The body feels empty, and there's a want to be full, no matter if filling myself makes sense or not. Looking into the mirror and seeing the pupils being still dilated. Coming to him, I feel drained and devoid of any emotion. We talk, and I'm sucking up information like a child listening to fairy tales. Anything that he spoke of feels good. There is a want to speak of the experience, not really to make sense of or understand it, but rather to express and put it out there. I see him without making up any concepts or stories. It is true listening while leaving yourself out of the equation. I recognise that speaking out what I want is then either manifested or not. I want to create the world. I request of him to get his blanket for us to just lay for some more time in the courtyard for more grounding. Too long, didn't read. Regular understanding that nothing makes sense or has meaning, and that just oneself creates meaning, is peanuts compared to direct recognition of complete meaninglessness. One can imagine it, but it's more radical than anything because there are no memories to put no meaning into perspective and to create meaning of meaninglessness. The recognition of radical meaninglessness is contingent on the death of the identity. All experience is only you. There is no other. Options are A. Everything you feel is the body. There's an external world that is experienced through the body. Or B. Everything you feel is the world being recognised as you. The screen of awareness is an illusion, and that is recognised. Recognising infinity is just a matter of consciousness. All of reality is a play. No identity is true. Feeling oneself to be empty is also connected to thoughtlessness, presence and flowing into silence, infinity, timeless moment. One beautiful hit. Listening to Leo Gura of Actualize.org's video of relative
posted to Earwig.org April 11th, 2012.
Helps tremendously to put this
As a casual tripper, mushrooms and phenethylamines were definitely otherworldly and revealing of my soul, but I never knew such a thing as this would ever be possible. I'm talking about my introduction to NN-dimethyltryptamine, or DMT, my one and only. For my experience, I was at a friend's house, dimly lit by small windows above my head and out of sight. The only light was from the fading evening and the sparkle of objects around me. I turn on Eyes of the World by the Grateful Dead, a 16-minute long version with saxophone and an extended jam. I'm seated on a comfortable couch and had been smoking a lot of cannabis in the form of blunts, and also in bowls for hours leading up to the experience. I was actually feeling only slightly burnt out, coming down and quite sober for a long-term marijuana smoker. My friend Henry walks over and hands me a crack pipe, a glass tube with a foil on the end, loaded what he called a big hit of NN-DMT. I'd just watched him launch off on his own journey. It looked rather strange. He'd closed his eyes and felt around through the air, making strange humming noises occasionally like he was seeing something else. I knew it would be intense. I go on and take the hit. It's my very first time doing this, and I know little of what to expect. Read on. Immediately, after exhaling, I raise my head and the room is vibrating very quickly, and this is quite visible in objects. Things begin to change depth wildly and quickly. Patterns begin to unfold over objects. The accelerating continues despite this, and soon the room is getting quite difficult to recognise. My thoughts suddenly break contact with the outside world, and understanding is severely crippled. Eyes close, almost involuntarily. Suddenly, I am immersed in the most dense, intense, unprepared voyage of my entire life. I quickly force my eyes open, as around the room my cousin and friend are trying to talk to me. The words are becoming intermixed, and suddenly, the words don't match the mouths. I instead am incredibly fixated on their facial expressions, and suddenly I can begin to read their thoughts. He's really getting into it now, one said, and no longer can I keep my head up. The room around me looked like a painting made by Michelangelo. The TV near the top of the room, which was off, turned into a heavenly mirror, and all the objects seemed to be sort of arranged around it like a god had set it up. It seemed to be too perfect. The objects were raising up to it, in a formation of sorts, and the visuals were getting too strange, nearly, if not disturbing. I say something along the lines of, "It's like an instant psychosis," to which my much older friend replies, "In a way, yeah." I become nearly nauseous from the speed of the experience and put my head down on my lap, but for some reason, I can still see the room I was in, exactly what I was just looking at, but just shadows of the people and objects that were being overcome by patterns, like cogs turning in a machine. Everything kept moving like I kept my eyes open, but soon, even this begins to fade out, seemingly into black. The last thing I hear is clearly coming from my cousin. Wow, well, I wonder how deep this can go. And then, there is no longer James, a human primate born of K and J, and at a friend's house doing a drug. What is a drug anyway? How can such a term even begin to describe the true being, the otherworldly void? This can't be a drug. This is life, society, understanding, values, morals, distant and distinct memories, my role, my status, any predispositions, gone. Scenes like a slideshow begin appearing, just as realistic as the room around me looks now. The scene formed and then panned in the direction of right, over the most detailed, alive and real metaphysical pictures I have ever seen. No artist can comprehend this. No human brain should even be able to contain this amount of information. It is absolutely insane to think about. But it goes even further than that. Soon, the scene in front of me dies in, and any visible hallucinations are lost. What is left is an extremely white, bright, shimmering light, like I was in the largest, most surreal and beautiful but empty room ever. I stopped feeling a body a long time ago. I was no longer in a body. I couldn't comprehend what a body is or where I even came from. Even what I was or how I am is a mystery right now. The only real thing left was what I consider my soul. Just a single point of consciousness in the real, the true sea of creation. I had returned home to pure being, and my past life, the whole lived out illusion, is all simply a very strange coincidental occurrence. That is not the true self, for the true self is ultimately part of something much larger, more vast and all-including. Every single sensory thought or experience, all merged into one giant, never-ending cosmic entity. Soon this panned out, and I began seeing the universe. But it wasn't just a universe, it was a multitude of universes. The multiverse. A large, almost writhing, with constant shifting and movement to and from different universes and points of reference. Any possibilities, occurrences, past and future, and right now, was all going on simultaneously in front of me. I began to see hundreds of different individuals' points of view. Out of their eyes, people I know, friends, relatives, and people I'd like to know. I saw all of their perspectives. Suddenly, I realised I was alive. The points of view I was looking at had to be something I knew, and I immediately was certain I was seeing what other people were seeing at that exact moment. I remember a friend whose point of view I looked out of specifically. Gone are the oddities of why we are here, how and what our purpose is. We are all manifests of the same godly single consciousness, and I truly saw my life for what it was. A cell, on a leaf, on a stick, on a larger stick, on a branch, on a larger branch, connected to the biggest redwood in the largest never-ending forest that ever existed. Suddenly, everything feels perfect, pure, awe-inspiring, truly completing. I am nothing, yet everything all at once. Even the multiverse was gone now, and visions of the future too. It was just me. My life is meaningless, but at the same time, truly beautiful to be able to behold. Like I received the once-in-a-lifetime chance of being granted outside consciousness to see all of this and appreciate it from another point of view. Upon death, I will return to what I was before, a true wave in the continuous sea of existence. Till then, I have been granted the opportunity so far to enjoy all of this as a part of the intelligent, understanding life here, in the second millennium of the current era. We are all yet another facet of the same, all-including, infinite entity in its constantly continuing, simple experience. I probably began coming down when I realised I was alive again. I noticed an extremely clean and pure feeling, and realised it must have been air, fresh, beautiful air, going in and out of my system. I still didn't feel my body, but I knew I had to be breathing, something. Oh wait, I do breathe, and it's fucking wonderful. Absolutely perfect actually. But that would mean, within a period of 5 to 10 seconds, the white light suddenly became the room around me. Even with eyes closed, I saw the room taking shape. When I opened them, finally, my vision was surreal and full of life. I immediately stood up, but could hardly walk for a second. "This is perfect," I immediately exclaimed. For some reason, I read my cousin and my friend's mind immediately. They were worried about how long my trip was taking, as I had to be heading home pretty soon. I had been completely immobile for nearly 10 minutes. They began to ask me if it was good, and I said, yes. Not yeah, yep, etc. Yes. But the most pronounced and almost too intellectual yes, like you might hear someone say who has studied English very hard but just isn't familiar with speaking it. The absolute strongest and most life-changing experience I've ever encountered and could ever imagine encountering had just occurred. I'd completely changed the process of my brain within 10 minutes time, and I loved it. I walked over to the TV and grabbed my iPod literally right after I stood up, and simultaneously knew I had to be leaving soon. My cousin and friend were shocked at how much I'd gotten out of it, and we immediately began to walk outside. There wasn't even really much to say about it. As I began getting in the car, suddenly I was overcome with thirst. It was like I hadn't had water in hours. I wasted no time saying, "I'm gonna need to get some water now," and my friend started saying he'd locked the house already. He asked if I'd like to get some water from the hose, and laughing with the most wonderful of joy and ecstasy in life, ran with him all the way over to his water hose like a man on a mission. I took sips out of it, and despite the water being public water and most likely disgusting, it was the most cleansing and pure tasting drink I had ever experienced in my life. It was then that I realised just how much my vision was still affected by the DMT. There was a paradigm shift in how I viewed the world around me that marked the drug leaving my system, but leaving its mark on me for good. For about the next hour or so, I felt what I wouldn't even call a high. I was living, and it couldn't get any better. I got dropped off at my cousin's house to get picked up. My car was broken at the time. He asked if it would be okay talking to my aunt if I had to which I responded, it was never a problem. I did indeed have to talk to my aunt, who noticed a car pulled up. I'm sure she thought I was under the influence, but I don't think I've ever been so kind and carefree sounding when having small talk. I told her I'd not need to go inside, as I would be leaving very soon, and she walked in with a smile on her face that I almost knew recognised that I was tripping. I went home and don't even fully remember anything of what ensued. I assume I fell asleep nearly immediately upon arriving there. I awoke the next morning on a Saturday, and could still feel the beauty nearly as strong as when I was talking to my aunt the day before. I quickly was inspired and ran to my printer, pulling out a large sheet of paper. I had so much to convey, and I began to draw. I then drew what is one of the best pictures I have ever created, and used shading, techniques, and creativity that I had never known was possible. It looked like what one might see from an art student, not an occasional doodler, and it was just perfect. This experience still is my strongest to date, and I do not regret it at all. I was quite young, but mentally it was never really my age anyway. I believe after this experience that I became a lot more self-aware. I seemed more here, more grounded, like I was actually open to millions of new things around me that before I had noticed but didn't think was important. I saw God and me in everything, and I still do. I began witnessing how interaction between the infinite multiverse comes together to create the reality we know and live in day by day. Events to this day are still filled with magic, inspiration and purpose. I get what is going on around me, but also notice that I lost interest in trying to find out more. I didn't and still do not think there is much more for me to discover through psychedelics, although I do enjoy phenethylamines with friends on an extremely rare occasion. I, however, do not take high doses or even really moderate doses anymore of anything. I have no desire to do DMT ever again, or even really trip on anything as much as just have a good time every few months on low dosages. I'm not sure if I ever had a desire to do it, but I did do it, and I would never have had it in any other way. I realised that drugs were not of much importance to me, and I spent far too much time smoking marijuana and not enough exploring just how much is around me in this world. Many thanks for reading this far, and may you have health and good fortune in your entire life and all of your enterprises. If anything, one might find negative came out of this, is that I don't enjoy doing most drugs at all anymore, and even get some negative effects I would never get before when I tried to abuse them hard. This, however, is wonderful for me, as I don't think that is my purpose. I don't think I was ever meant to abuse these substances. It didn't stop me smoking marijuana. In fact, I'll probably increase my marijuana usage after that, but it sure cut me down to size with just about everything else. Until next time, I'll see you on the other side.
The following cannabis trip report was sent in by Ryan. This is a great little report because it hammers home a point that I think a lot of people take for granted, and that's the fact that any psychoactive chemical can affect people extremely differently. Oftentimes I find that psychonauts have a habit of dismissing people's trip reports on cannabis because personally for them it affects them in a very subtle, sort of passive way, But for people like, say, Ryan in this report and me, when we smoke cannabis, it can be a full-on psychedelic trip with God realization experiences, ego dissolution, visuals, hallucinations of entities, etc. And people just like to reduce this down to, oh, well, your weed was tampered with clearly, or it was actually a completely different substance to weed. But nah, honestly, if I the other week, like, I smoked some weed and thought, oh, alright, I can smoke quite a bit and see what happens. And I was having some pretty dark, depressing, ego dissolution, solipsistic experiences. And it was not pleasant. And it just hammered home to me the point that, yeah, people need to be a bit more open when it comes to understanding that cannabis is a psychedelic and it does affect you extremely differently depending on your genes, your level of consciousness, your ego. So many little factors that can affect your reaction to something that a lot of people just consider to be a very light psychedelic like cannabis. But yeah, now that I've finished rambling, let's get stuck into the video. November 5th, 2016. A family camping trip report with a cannabis vape pen. During a family trip along a Florida river in November 2016, my family and I had planned on taking our usual tubing trip with the other hordes of people who frequent this location most of the year. In Florida, most of the year is comfortable for swimming, especially along spring runs, as the water temperature is 72 degrees year round, cool in summer and warm in winter. This particular campground has about 100 campsites along the river, and at times has a very party-like atmosphere, with a mix of families and partying college kids. It was a beautiful, brisk and sunny November day. We all jumped on our floats and headed downstream for about an hour and a half float. A person in the group had a vape pen with near 100% THC. I'd been drinking a little earlier in the day, so when the vape pen made its way to me, I took a huge long rip. It took about 2 minutes for the effects to kick in. What followed next took me by surprise, because A, I was floating in the middle of a river and could have easily drowned, and B, the sudden onset of a psychedelic trip with what I thought was a non-psychedelic substance. I was immediately phased out of my body, and phased into what appeared to be outer space. Planets were visible, and I'd come to see myself laying in a small pod-like structure anchored in the vastness of this realm. A portion of my awareness was left floating on the river, since later on when I described what would become a short psychedelic trip, my father, who was floating next to me, stated that I was babbling on about planets and stars. As I gazed out towards this sci-fi screensaver view of planets before me, the planets themselves seemed to have a soul, a personality, an awareness of their own, and recognised me as one of their own as well. After sitting for what felt like a few moments, I had heard a voice that sounded similar to my own that said, "This is the origin of all thought." I sat in bewilderment for a few additional moments. Was this God? My higher self? As I continued to exist in space, I phased out of the pod I was laying in, and the sun became apparent and front and centre in my experience. I can only attribute this to the sun being in my face back in the normal waking world. Back in the trip, as I gazed into the sun, waves of an overwhelming euphoric feeling of unconditional love and warmth, like the love and light described during near-death experiences, poured from the sun towards and through me. As the love overwashed me, a Christ-like image within the sun became visible, with arms outstretched, surrounded by a golden orange glow. There's one painting by the psychedelic artist Alex Gray, which similarly depicts what is being experienced, entitled Christ with an Interfaith Heart. I was raised Catholic, but didn't take any of my forced church-going during childhood with much reverence. I understood religion, but never took it on as my own. Further into college, I had an overtly atheistic and materialistic way of looking at the world, scornfully denouncing my somewhat religious upbringing. So the Christ-like imagery within the sun and all this love was a welcomed experience indeed. After a few moments with what appeared to be a living being that was the sun, my gaze continued from the celestial heights, back down to the river upon which I was floating. The trip now seemed to be superimposed on waking reality, as I could see the other people floating down the river. However, they seemed to also recognise the love and light flowing from the sun, basking in it and receiving it with joy. It was as if I had a glimpse of the higher selves within these individuals, from a different perspective. After coming back down, I re-entered my body and was able to get out of the water, albeit dazed and confused by the experience. It's taken years to understand what had happened. I'll never look at cannabis the same way. I still use it occasionally and treat it as a sacrament. I knew at high doses that this ancient medicine is psychedelic, but never did I imagine weed could catapult one into an expansive experience such as what happened to me that day on the river. I've had other experiences with low doses of psilocybin, but never to the extent and intensity of this one trip. I even had to ask the owner of the vape pen if there may have been any residue of other substances, such as DMT or the like, used with the pen. But no, just plain THC triggered an accelerated awakening process in me, and has led to a dramatic change in lifestyle. I no longer consume alcohol. I eat only fruits and veggies, and no longer watch any TV or even read the news. I've always been attracted to the metaphysical, but this experience has cemented a lifelong change in me. I've come to find solace in knowing that which gurus, ancient sages and masters have been telling humanity for ages, that we are immensely powerful light beings having temporary human experiences. Enjoy the experience here. Positive or negative, there are lessons in divinity within every moment. Cheers. The Illusion of Material Reality, a methoxetamine and 2CB trip report, uploaded to Earwood by Vastness on December 20th, 2019. I feel like I might be saying this a lot recently, but apart from a fairly harrowing and difficult experience on another psych and dissociative combo recently, which was far more immersive and far stranger, this one was in a sense completely different, and also in many ways so much more powerful because of the consistent lucidity of the experience. Some parts of the experience, as ever, defy words, and although at the time I wondered if I could change forever from this point forward, as ever, the descent back from the higher consciousness of the psychedelic state brings back all the illusions and trappings of sober life, and the accompanying doubt in the existence of anything beyond this thinly veiled illusion of the material. In any case, firstly, some backstory. I was not in the best place mentally. I'd been looking forward to a date with a very interesting and beautiful girl, which had been cancelled at the last minute, her having just started getting serious with someone else. I tried to stick to my usual routine of gym, meditation, positive habits and exercise, and thus had seen a friend earlier in the day and worked out for about an hour and a half. A relevant factor is that in the morning that day, I imbibed 200mg of phenyl paracetam and 100 micrograms of Adamax, a longer-lasting analogue of the Russian nootropic Semax, as an exercise performance enhancer and slight mood lift. This was at about 9:30 am. 5 or so hours later, I was very tired and starting to feel quite down. Although I had told myself I would not use any MXE for at least another few months, I did also use 100mg yesterday. I found myself automatically getting the baggie out and starting to cut 20mg lines. One note before we begin. Timestamps are essentially guesses. I didn't make any real notes, I just looked at the clock a few times, but I think they're accurate enough. T-minus 1 hour. Pre-doses, MXE, analysis of potential interactions. I started dosing about 6 PM, 8 hours and 30 minutes after the nootropics. Phenyl paracetam has a half-life of 3 to 5 hours, so going by the approximate 5 half-lives rule for essentially total clearance, I probably still had at least 25mg in my body, although whether this was exerting any residual effects is an open question. Semax itself has a much shorter half-life of just a few minutes, although allegedly, its effects on the body can persist up to 24 hours, so it's quite possible this small dose of Adamax was exerting some residual effect on my neurochemistry. Anyway, while watching a show on Netflix, a hobby which I previously had something of a problem with, but have really made a solid effort at knocking it on the head recently through practicing positive habits and attempting to always be present and not waste my precious time on Earth. But this time I was allowing myself to indulge, just to self-soothe through external sensory distractions. I started out with 40mg, then I was dosing lines of MXE every 20 minutes or so I was done with the 80mg by about 7 PM. Just prior to the last line, I started thinking that maybe I should take a psychedelic instead. I always feel dissociatives are somewhat dark, destructive drugs. Yes, maybe they provide access to a similar realm as psychedelics do, but they do so through twisted channels and at considerable psychological cost, especially for more habitual or frequent users, where the corrosive effects of the psychic intrusion, so to speak, start to cause wear and negative effects on the mind. This is true for most people, I think, although I don't doubt some people do manage to use dissociatives safely, mindfully, and while steering clear of them whenever the darker edges start to show. I personally just did not. Indeed, even using small doses of MXC, 100mg or so in a night, makes my bladder hurt a little even after a several-month break from ketamine, which should be concerning enough for me to stop entirely, but it so far hasn't been. T0 hours, 24mg of 2CB. I've been planning to take a new 2CX chemical soon, but this night I did not feel up to taking something unfamiliar, so I settled on 2CB, a substance I have done a few times and which I find to be quite forgiving on the whole. I only took a small dose at first, around 8mg, and I then decided to up this with another 16mg, taking my total dose to 24mg of 2CB, combined with 80mg of MXE. At first, I continued watching the show I was sitting through. It was a somewhat dark episode where a character just hung themselves, but I tried to just keep myself present, and began to think I was being shown this to remind myself that no matter how bad I thought things were, they were still a lot better than they could have been. I had, prior to this, been starting to feel quite good. A combination of the gentle come up of 2CB plus the MXE starting to set in, although I did think initially that the MXE was feeling a little mild. Maybe a dose played a factor. Maybe the famous dissociative sobriety delusion, either of which could have contributed to my decision to take 2CB, which was rather spontaneous and unplanned. In any case, at this point, maybe 30 minutes into the 2CB, I was not getting any real visuals as such, but was starting to feel a strange, slightly anxious feeling. Maybe not too unfamiliar with any psychedelic, at least for me. Finally, I decided I could no longer stomach the grim storyline I was watching, so I switched to something a bit more light-hearted. I found I couldn't really follow this, and in fact found the fast-moving pace of the pictures and colours a little hard to follow and disorientating. So I tried putting on some music. This was equally disconcerting though, so I shut my laptop and went to simply lie down, telling myself I was just going to meditate lying down and feel the sensations wash over me as they may. T plus 1 hours, ? Lying down with eyes closed. I lay down in silence and closed my eyes. At this point the experience, I would say, although veering into somewhat uncomfortable territory, was still quite mild. With my eyes closed, I watched the movements of roiling shades of grey behind my eyes, like some kind of sea of liquid rubber suspended in white space, while various blobs connected and diverged from the other floating blobs with rubbery tendrils. I was starting to feel something else at this point, although I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was exactly. I decided rather than clearing my mind, to try to take a more active role in the experience, and try to feel my astral self and my chakras. I've been reading a little about chakras recently, and although I'm not entirely sure I believe in them, I had an insight of sorts during a period of sober meditation that appears to have benefited me in controlling difficult feelings in everyday life. So, I tried to focus on my energy body. As I did this, the grey sea of blobs began to darken, and new colours began to appear. Bright colours of electric green and yellow, and blue and red. And I realised that I was no longer seeing the field of view behind my closed eyes, but a network of energy that was within myself. Honestly, the specifics of this experience, especially chronology, are somewhat lost in my drug-infused memory. But I was vaguely aware that something magical seemed to be happening. I opened my eyes, got up and went to the toilet, and could feel that familiar, mild urinary retention and bladder twinge while urinating. This concerned me, of course, although it immediately struck me that it was not permanent. Nothing was. And this was a challenge that the universe itself had set before me. As long as I just don't do any more MXE, I'll be fine. T plus 1 hour and 30 minutes. Wandering. Entity contact. While I was walking out the bathroom, it was like my body was coursing with energy. Not all of it comfortable. Some of it I worry about having damaged my health in a way I knew I should have known better than to do. Additionally, just unidentifiable, uncomfortable body sensations. I decided to try and probe this further, and had an urge to just close my eyes, and try to listen into the sensation, to feel again, my astral self. During my sober meditations, as I mentioned, I became aware of some kind of tingling, erratic, unstable energy in my chest, which I identified as my heart chakra. Upon reading further, earlier while sober, an energy blockage in the heart chakra seemed to match a lot of the negative psychological issues I had been struggling with, and still am to some extent. Anxiety, demotivation, apathy, trouble connecting with others. And I was granted, thought of, had the insight into a visualization I could do, envisioning a golden orb in the centre of my chest. Like I was consciously stabilising this blockage and allowing the life energy of the cosmos to flow through me unimpeded. I've since been able to use this technique to bring myself back to the present and separate myself from the ceaseless ocean of my seething human mind, with some successes I might say. In any case, I tried to begin with this, to feel the energy in my heart chakra, and use this energy to create a suction effect, to draw energy from the earth through my legs, abdomen, to the top of my head, and thus feel where my body was weakest. As this happened, it was like suddenly I was separate from this pain. I was within my body still, but I was also something else. Like I'd partially uncoupled my soul from its incarnate form, and I could observe myself, without judgment, objectively, and see the areas I was doing damage. Bladder, kidneys, lungs from the occasional cigarette. More general effects of poor health decisions in some sense. But for these moments, I didn't feel it. The same multicoloured fractalizing ocean of blobs in blackness, like an infinite multi-dimensional lava lamp, danced behind my eyes. I opened them again, and partially came back to the physical. At this point, the open eye visuals were ramping up. I was seeing traces. No solid object was truly solid anymore. The black textured marble effects of my kitchen worktops were swirling and moving like water, and I realised this point that everything was shimmering in the winds of eternity. My mind's filtering mechanism for the all-consciousness that pervades all of existence was no longer able to keep things constrained, and I felt like in a moment everything could just dissolve. Everything is surface detail, an illusion, but the illusion of time keeps us anchored to it. I felt like the veil of reality was becoming translucent, offering me the chance of a tantalising glimpse at what lay beyond. At the same time, my body was feeling like it was suffering somewhat, possibly under the strain of overstimulation from the MXC and 2CB combo, combined with the hour and a half of high-intensity training I had done earlier, and probably not giving myself ample time to recover from. I walked back into my front room, slowly this time, trying my best to just be, not think of the past, the future, or the worries of the day or of life. Just focus on this moment right now, for this moment surely wouldn't last. But I was in a holy place of magic, and if I wanted to get anything out of it, I needed to not fight it. In fact, I had to savour it as best I can. But, as I mentioned, I do have some residual anxieties and fears I'm working through, which manifest typically as a tightness in my chest, which sometimes makes everyday life a struggle, even when it should be easy, or I should say, would seem easy to some. Sat down on my sofa and opened my laptop. Immediately after, I closed it again. Technology was not what I wanted right now. I had a few moments of apprehension, even fear, and I was considering if I could truly handle this, whether I should take an Atizolam or Valium of 2 to calm down. I told myself I would not, however. I've softened the majesty of such celestial experiences enough times already. It was time to brave this onslaught of divine grace with courage, without diluting it with anything else. I had zero desire to do any more MXC at this point. Accessible though it would have been, I was probably still on it, that said, but wanted to have as pure as an experience as I could. I could see no way to distract myself or make it easier. So, I sat down in my chair I usually used to meditate, again in silence, and closed my eyes. The visuals now had taken on a different character of sorts, of impossible shapes moving more slowly, but of incredible beauty. The tendrils within myself I felt before were now reaching out into something that was not myself. Something before me began to form a shape of indefinable dimensions, ever-changing colours, and some kind of background, slow music, like it was coming from a far distance started up in my head. Writing this now, I believe I heard this far more faintly than when I was first lying on my bed, but it was low enough in volume to dismiss. This time, it wasn't. This is some kind of celestial song of the universe or the divine that I often hear during trips, especially if I do them in silence. Although to be honest, I do not trip in silence too often, but usually towards the end when I am lying down, trying to come down, I will hear this sound. In any case, this shape was a smooth fluid of electric tendrils branching out in all directions. It was somehow rotating, but in the same way that a shape of more dimensions than we can usually perceive would rotate. If you're not quite sure what this means, watch a video of a rotating tesseract or hypercube as visible from a three-dimensional observer. Look like that, but far more complex, somehow with infinitely more vertices, corners, and possibly changing form as it went. The energy tendrils entwined with my own, and I felt their touch, and I immediately felt something not of this world. I could scarcely handle the electricity, which seemed to be filling my mind to the exclusion of all thought, all that I thought I knew, and I felt the telepathic communication from this being, or rather a collection of beings, without words. But they told me that I had been put on this earth for a purpose, and that while I was on earth, I would not know them, I would not see them, and I would forget what I truly was. But everything is playing out as it always would. Everything was playing out as planned. No matter where I was in life, I was here for a reason. I was here because of the orchestration of forces I could not hope to comprehend. All this being the case in some sense, I recognised that I was a part of them, or had been at one point, and maybe would be again. At that point, I opened my eyes. Within the room before me was a translucent being, with some kind of triangular head, which seemed a more stable, less fluctuating and incomprehensible version of the shape I'd seen before. But the being was entirely translucent. If you've seen the camouflage suit in the film Predator, that's what they looked like. My eyes were transfixed. I did not dare look around or away. In this moment, I had no doubt of the reality of this, but I also felt I should just not look away. The entity stood very close to me, towered over me. Not sure if it had limbs, but I felt it enveloping me with some kind of energy field. Maybe long, spindly arms. Maybe the same tendrils I saw before with my eyes closed. Out of the corner of my eyes, I could see more such figures, standing back, almost invisible in their translucent forms. Some anthropomorphic, some amorphous, some just something else. I had the sensation of being in the presence of the divine movers behind reality. No words were spoken, and I was frightened, but I did not feel any malice from these entities, only love. I had this sensation that some of these entities had been humans once. This was like an innate sensation, like my own soul could sense others of my kind, but some of them had never been human. Not that they were alien, maybe just never incarnate, truly of a different plane. At this point, I did speak, believing fully that I was in the presence of consciousness immaterial, that had transcended or just always been above this physical world. I asked if my father was with them. My father had died recently, about 2 years ago, and I was informed that he was. I'd closed my eyes again. The visual impact seemed to somehow cloud my ability to perceive whatever was coming through from behind the veil. I sensed some kind of chatter, and was told that he was there. At this point, it was like I could suddenly feel his presence, although I couldn't see him entirely. The translucent shapes when I closed my eyes gave way to oscillating layers of colour, intertwining, overlapping. Some kind of energy I cannot truly describe, but which I understood to be a conglomerate of all who had given me the gift of this vision, as well as some kind of higher reflection of individual consciousness from elsewhere in space and time. My father was very ill when he died, and not the person that he once was. We also had a very difficult relationship, for which we could be said, in some sense, to both share the blame. Although, I take responsibility for it, because I'm only responsible for my own actions. I then began to perceive a particular sheet of rippling energy move forwards to overlap most of the rest, behind only the oscillating hyper-object, which remained directly before me, seeming to facilitate this connection with the other world. Again, no words were spoken from the entities, but I sensed from them that indeed my father was with them, and I perceived my father making himself known kindly, although he did not speak, indeed couldn't speak, for the veil could not be entirely surpassed, perhaps not even by these pseudo-gods or eternal spirits. T+2 hours. Overwhelming emotional release. At this point, I found myself crying, something I have not really done since my father died. I bent over in my chair, opened my eyes and looked at the ground, immediately abashed to be given the audience I had been apparently given. I thanked my father tearfully for all he had given me in life, and said I was so sorry that I had not been kinder to him. As I spoke these words, I had the sensation that he understood, and more, and I would too one day, but for now could let it go. and I felt other entities voicing their input like a silent celestial cacophony of direct-to-mind silent sounds, overlaid with the celestial music and a new deep oscillation from the object that started to change faster and create a noise like of an oscillating piece of thick metal in air until it reached a crescendo and was gone. I suddenly breathed, great gasping breaths, sucking in air to take everything in, so humbled and awestruck as I tried to appreciate the majesty of what I had touched and what I had seen. I looked around the room and realised that everything was exactly as it was supposed to be. The moment is all there is, and this was the moment. At this point in time, I had no worries at all. I had absolute faith in the universe, myself, and God himself, herself, itself, that I was on the only path I could be on. I had arrived here in the only way I ever could, and I would live my life in the only way I was ever going to, even if the future was uncertain, unknown, or simply forgotten to me. I got up, just to try to orient myself after this breathtaking inner journey. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I walked back into the kitchen under the bright fluorescent light to look at the shimmering visuals. Everything was alive still and shimmering. While the entities themselves were starting to recede from my consciousness, I could still feel them just behind the veil. The room sparkled with magic energy, rippling again with waves from the ether that coursed through my mind and forced open the usually tightly closed filtering mechanisms that allow us to operate in sober reality. I realised I was now quite dizzy, even sick, like I might need to purge or throw up, collapse, lie down. I really didn't want to do this, and tried to steel myself, bizarrely. I remember thinking I didn't want to embarrass myself in the presence of the gods, like this was a test to see if I was worthy to be given the lesson they wanted to give me. Suddenly, I just stopped still, standing bolt upright, looking at a white tile on the wall. This time, I felt another presence reaching through the void, one of something almighty, of inconceivable power, and as it observed me, the power of its gaze sent an invincible feeling of divine, otherworldly power surging through my limbs, and right then I felt like I could truly weather anything. Indeed, I had a duty to, and I would be granted strength by God. I realised again that life was all around us, not as we understand it, but awareness, consciousness in some form. I also realised that I was but a vessel for the almighty Lord God of all creation. I'm using a somewhat Christian metaphor here, although I explicitly am not Christian. I don't subscribe to the Jesus mythology at all, yada yada. It's just what came to my mind, arguably because my upbringing was Christian. I just had to fall to my knees, and again I spoke. I said something like, "I surrender to your grace. Use me as your vessel. I am your instrument on earth." I might have cried again while I said this. I felt honestly like a warrior for God. But the battle was life itself, and to live it, and exert my will in the only way I am able. I think some of this, I must admit, beautiful as the experience was the classic dissociative egotism creeping in and casting shade on the psychedelic experience, like I myself was unique and special, but my belief was not entirely egotistical in nature, for I understood at this point that this is true for all of us. We are all vessels, mere conduits for the universal, multiversal, omnipotent, self-creating boltzmann brain of infinity itself. I touched the earth, actually the tiles on my kitchen floor, and could feel the raw power of history surging beneath me. I knew I was not the first to be touched in this way, and I felt the strength of every strong, courageous, brave or good action taken by any human being, indeed even pre-human beings, that had brought me to where I was now. I've been feeling quite lonely, as I mentioned at the beginning, but in this moment, again I realised that we are never alone. We are always surrounded by the souls of all who have come before us, and indeed, all who will come after us. Love is all around us, and all of us, no matter what our differences are working towards the advancement of life and love in the only way we know how, even when it seems we're doing the opposite. Everything happens the only way it can. T plus 2 hours and 30 minutes. Breaking one of my golden rules of tripping and calling someone. I had the urge to call someone. I noticed with some surprise it was only about 9:30, so I'd been tripping for 2.5 hours now, although it seemed like a lot longer. As I say, at this point I had an urge to call someone, so I picked up my phone, put it down again quickly, and thought about that again. I have this golden rule, so as not to cause nuisance, embarrassment or fallout while in deep trips alone, which is to under no circumstances text, call or answer phones, unless it seems to be an absolute emergency, and I was lucid enough that my previously ingrained safety subroutines were still intact. Whatever news this was that I wanted to share, it could wait until later. However, my sister texted me about something. I texted back that I loved her, and she immediately guessed I was tripping. I phoned, and we had a brief chat, although after voicing my love and finding she was actually about to drive from work and seemed a bit stressed, I felt a little awkward, so I quickly let her go. She was cool about it though, and my decision to call her definitely was the minimum amount of fallout, all things considered. She might joke about it later, but that's it. Other options I considered were my mum, so glad I didn't do this, or a friend who actually is recently going through the whole AA-NA thing, so I did not feel it would be appropriate, and I might have perceived a judgy vibe whether imaginary or not. On hanging up, however, the awkwardness was immediately dismissed, as I realised this was just another joke of the grand game of the human condition, an illusion of the mind. I realised as I started to come down that some of my anxieties about what I had done, my life, how I was going to operate tomorrow, work, etc., were coming back, but I was able to quickly dismiss them and just laugh. This is the cosmic joke of the game of human life. These things have been put here for a reason, challenges to help us grow and fulfill our divine purpose, and we need to live with them, overcome them. Indeed, it is our sacred duty to do so as best we can, and to help others to do so as well, as best we can. But there is just no reason to surrender to them, only to surrender to the whims of the gods, the universe, or fate, or whatever reality really is, which is surely something stranger than any of us can ever imagine. T plus 5 hours. Coming down. I did start to feel very scatty, overstimulated, just not pleasant, and my bladder pain started to return around 12 midnight, 5 hours after dosing. I tried to just resume what I was doing, but was just feeling very restless, still quite overstimulated and uncomfortable. Eventually, I took 2 milligrams of Atizolam and 10 milligrams of Valium to sleep. Day after, and afterthoughts. I woke up early, and honestly have taken about the same amount of benzos, the NOs today. I put this down more to the MXE than the 2CB, but I felt very scattered and uncomfortable, but also just great. Very, very grateful to be alive, and with an overwhelming love for everyone I know. I plan to make a point of telling all my friends and family that I love them when I see them next, which I never do, but we should tell the people we love that we love them. I won't say that this was so powerful it changed me overnight, but I have a resistance to such immediate change anyway, as drugs of course delude just as much, or arguably more often, than they offer us real insights. I prefer to let things settle and see what sticks. Honestly though, I think I'm done with all that aryl cyclohexylamines now. They never offer me too much that I don't believe could be offered in a more pure way with psychedelics alone. They are in many ways just pure self-indulgent hedonism, and most importantly, they make my bladder hurt, even in low doses, which is surely asking for trouble. To continue this would be insane. Same goes for cocaine, minus the bladder thing. I won't say I'll never do any of these ever again. I know how fickle and changeable and forgetful the human mind is, no matter how profound the lesson, but it will be years. This is probably the closest I got ever to developing an actual, honest-to-God belief in God, afterlives, pre-lives, and an ethereal realm beyond what we can perceive in the material. I don't really know what to make of this now. I'm just so cynical and bound to neurological, mechanistic explanations of human interpretations of divine phenomenon. But during this trip, I felt without a doubt that God is real, that gods are real, death is not the end, ethereal beings are always with us, and that there is an ethereal plane inaccessible to us but always around us. Is it true and not a delusion? Who knows? I guess it's impossible not to forget again once we return to a sober state. Our minds just naturally filter it out, or maybe start functioning normally again and separating reality from fiction. I hope you all enjoyed reading regardless.